The butter churn sat empty on the worn wooden table, and Rebecca Thornton stared at it with the kind of desperation only a woman facing complete ruin could understand. She had promised Mrs. Henderson 3 pounds of butter by Saturday morning, along with 2 dozen eggs and a wheel of cheese, and without cream she had nothing. The chickens were producing well enough, and the cheese was already aging in the cool cellar, but the butter was impossible without cream. Her cow, Bess, had died 3 days ago after eating something poisonous in the far pasture, leaving Rebecca without her primary source of income in a territory that showed no mercy to those who could not pay their debts. The Nebraska plains stretched endlessly outside her small cabin window, golden grass bending in the hot July wind of 1876. Belmont was 10 miles south, a growing town that served the ranchers and homesteaders scattered across the territory. Her late husband's claim sat on decent land with a spring-fed creek, but without livestock or the money to buy more, the 160 acres might as well have been barren desert. Thomas had been dead nearly 8 months now, taken by pneumonia during the brutal winter. They had been married only 2 years, both of them young and full of dreams about building something lasting on the frontier. Rebecca had just turned 20 when Thomas died, and now, at 21, she faced the very real possibility of losing everything they had worked for. She needed cream, and she needed it today. The closest ranch was the O'Connor place, 5 miles east along the creek. She had seen Andrew O'Connor in town a handful of times, a tall man in his mid-20s with dark hair and serious gray eyes who ran cattle on a spread that seemed to grow larger every year. He was one of the more successful ranchers in the area, which meant he likely had milk cows to supply his ranch hands with butter and cream. Rebecca had never spoken to him directly. Thomas had dealt with the neighboring ranchers when they needed to coordinate water rights or warn about cattle rustlers passing through. She had been content to manage her small dairy operation and garden, selling her goods in town to supplement their income. Pride warred with necessity as she stood in her kitchen, but necessity won. It always did out here. She changed into her better dress, a simple blue calico that was nevertheless clean and neatly mended. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a woman who looked older than her years, with light brown hair pulled back in a practical bun and gray eyes that had seen too much loss. She was pretty enough, she supposed, though she had never given much thought to such things. Thomas had loved her, and that had been sufficient. The walk to the O'Connor ranch took nearly 2 hours under the blazing sun. Rebecca carried a small basket with half a dozen eggs as an offering, something to show she was not simply begging. She would pay for the cream or trade goods for it, maintaining the dignity that seemed so important even when your stomach was tight with worry. The O'Connor ranch house came into view around mid-morning, a substantial structure of hewn logs with a covered porch and real glass windows. The barn was enormous, painted red like the ones back east, and several smaller outbuildings dotted the property. Cattle grazed in the distance, and closer to the barn she could see horses in a corral. It was the kind of operation that spoke of hard work and smart management, the realization of dreams that her own small holding had never quite achieved. A dog barked as she approached, and a moment later a man emerged from the barn. Rebecca recognized Andrew O'Connor immediately, though he was in work clothes covered in dust and sweat. He was taller than she remembered, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of someone who worked his own land rather than just directing others. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his face was tanned from endless hours in the sun. He stopped when he saw her, surprise evident in his expression. Visitors were common enough on the frontier, but a woman walking alone in the heat was unusual. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, his voice deep and uncertain. "Is everything all right, Mr. O'Connor?" she replied, suddenly feeling foolish with her basket of eggs and her desperate errand. "I apologize for arriving unannounced. I find myself in need of assistance, and I hoped we might discuss a business arrangement." His expression shifted from surprise to concern, and he gestured toward the house. "Of course. Please come out of the sun. You must be exhausted from the walk." "I am perfectly fine," she said, though in truth her feet ached and her throat was dry. "I do not wish to impose on your time. I simply need to purchase some cream if you have any to spare." Something in her voice must have conveyed her urgency, because Andrew studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "I have cream," he said. "But please, at least come inside for some water. We can discuss business once you have rested a moment." Rebecca wanted to refuse, to maintain the professional distance that propriety demanded, but the thought of cool water was too tempting. She nodded and followed him toward the house. The interior was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's home. The main room held a large table with 6 chairs, a cook stove that looked new, and shelves lined with books. Everything was clean and orderly, suggesting either that Andrew was unusually fastidious or that he employed a housekeeper. A doorway led to what she assumed were bedrooms, and another opened into a well-stocked pantry. Andrew poured water from a pitcher into a tin cup and handed it to her. Rebecca drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat. "Please sit," Andrew said, pulling out a chair. "I admit I am surprised to see you walking in this heat. Is your horse lame?" "I do not have a horse anymore," Rebecca admitted, seeing no point in pretense. "I sold my team last month to pay the land office fees. My cow died 3 days ago, and I have orders to fill in town. I brought eggs to trade for cream, or I can pay in cash if the price is reasonable." She set the basket on the table and met his eyes directly, determined to conduct this transaction with dignity even if her circumstances were reduced. Andrew looked at the basket, then back at her face. "Mrs. Thornton, I heard about your husband's passing. I am sorry I did not call to offer my condolences. That was remiss of me." "You did not know us well," Rebecca said. "There is no fault in that. Still, neighbors should look after each other out here." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "I have plenty of cream. My cook makes more than we can use. You are welcome to what you need." "I insist on paying," Rebecca said quickly, "or trading goods. I will not accept charity, Mr. O'Connor." A slight smile touched his lips, the first she had seen from him. "I would not insult you with charity, Mrs. Thornton, but I will say that a trade of eggs for cream seems more than fair. My chickens have been poor layers this summer." Rebecca suspected he was being generous with his assessment, but she nodded. It was a way to accept help while maintaining her pride, and she was grateful for his tact. "How much cream do you need?" Andrew asked. "Enough for 3 pounds of butter if you can spare it. I have a churn at home." "I can do better than that," Andrew said. "Wait here a moment." He disappeared through a door that led to what looked like a cool room dug into the earth behind the house. When he returned, he carried a large ceramic crock sealed with wax. "This should be enough for 4 pounds at least. My cook churned yesterday, so this is fresh." Rebecca stared at the crock. It was far more than she had hoped for, enough to fill her current order and have extra to sell. "Mr. O'Connor, I cannot possibly trade 6 eggs for that much cream. It would not be fair." "Then perhaps you would consider a different arrangement," Andrew said. He set the crock on the table and leaned against the edge, his expression thoughtful. "I have a proposition, if you are willing to hear it." Rebecca felt a flicker of unease. She knew how vulnerable she was, a young widow alone on the frontier. She had heard stories of men who took advantage of such situations, offering help that came with unspoken expectations. But something in Andrew's demeanor seemed honest, and she had little choice but to listen. "What sort of proposition?" she asked carefully. "My cook is getting old and wants to move to Denver to live with her daughter. She has been with me since I started this ranch 5 years ago, and I do not wish to keep her here out of obligation. But that leaves me in a difficult position. I have 6 hands working the ranch full-time, and feeding them is no small task. I need someone who can manage the household, do the cooking and cleaning, handle the dairy work and the garden. Someone reliable and skilled." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I have tasted your butter in town, Mrs. Thornton. Mrs. Henderson sells it at the general store, and it is the best I have had outside of my own cooks. Your cheese as well. You clearly know your trade. I would like to offer you employment if you would consider it." Rebecca felt her heart skip. Employment meant steady income, reliable money that could save her claim and give her breathing room to rebuild. But it also meant leaving her own home each day, working on someone else's property. And there was the matter of propriety. "Mr. O'Connor, I appreciate the offer, but I have my own land to manage. I cannot abandon it to work here full-time." "I did not suggest abandoning your claim," Andrew said. "My thought was this: you work here 6 days a week, managing the household and the dairy. You would have Sundays free, plus time each day to handle your own stock if you choose to rebuild. I would pay you $35 a month, plus you could keep any excess cream, eggs, and milk from the dairy for your own use or to sell." $35 a month was more than Rebecca had made in her best month selling dairy goods. It was enough to not just survive but to actually save money, to perhaps buy new stock and improve her property. But there was still the question of propriety. "What about your cook?" Rebecca asked. "When does she plan to leave?" "End of August. That gives us 6 weeks to work out the arrangement and for you to learn how she has been running things. Mr. O'Connor, people will talk. A young widow working in a bachelor's home." Andrew nodded slowly. "I have considered that. The house is large enough that you would have your own room with a lock on the door. My foreman and his wife live in the bunkhouse and can serve as chaperones of sorts. And if you prefer, you could return to your own cabin each night rather than staying here." "That would add 2 hours of walking to each day," Rebecca pointed out. "I could provide a horse for your use," Andrew offered. "An older mare that is gentle and reliable. You could keep her at your place and ride over each morning." Rebecca felt the walls of her desperation beginning to crumble. This was more than she had hoped for, more than she had dared to dream when she had set out this morning with her basket of eggs. But she had learned to be cautious of things that seemed too good to be true. "Why are you being so generous?" she asked bluntly. "You do not know me, Mr. O'Connor. For all you know, I am a terrible cook or a lazy worker." Andrew was quiet for a moment, and something complicated passed across his face. "My mother was widowed when I was 15, he finally said. "My father was killed in a mining accident in Colorado. She tried to keep our small farm going, but she had no help and no income. Eventually, she had to sell everything and move in with her brother. She died 2 years later, worn out and heartbroken. I was already working on ranches by then, learning the trade and saving money. By the time I had enough to support her, she was gone." He looked at Rebecca directly, and she saw genuine feeling in his gray eyes. "I know what it is like to watch someone you love struggle alone. I know what it costs. If I can offer fair employment to someone who needs it, I will. If you prove to be lazy or incompetent, I will let you go. But I do not think you are either of those things, Mrs. Thornton." Rebecca felt something tight in her chest loosen. This was not pity or manipulation. This was a man who had known loss and chose to act with kindness because of it. She could respect that. She could trust that at least enough to try. "I accept your offer," she said, "though I insist on proving myself before you give me a horse. I will walk for the first week, and if you find my work satisfactory, we can discuss the other arrangements." Andrew extended his hand, and after a moment Rebecca shook it. His grip was strong and calloused, his hand warm against hers. The handshake lasted only a moment, but Rebecca felt something unexpected, a flutter of awareness that she immediately pushed aside. This was business, nothing more. "When would you like me to start?" she asked, withdrawing her hand. "Would Monday be too soon? That would give you the rest of the week to settle your current obligations." "Monday is suitable," Rebecca agreed. She gestured to the crock of cream. "But I still need this today if the trade stands." "The trade stands," Andrew said, smiling slightly. "Though I am now your employer, so perhaps I should simply include it as an advance on your wages." "Absolutely not," Rebecca said firmly. "We trade the eggs for the cream, and employment begins Monday. I will not mix the two transactions." "As you wish, Mrs. Thornton." There was amusement in his voice now, and Rebecca found herself almost smiling in return. Andrew helped her secure the heavy crock in her basket, adding a cloth to protect it from the sun. As she prepared to leave, he hesitated. "Mrs. Thornton, I must insist on one thing. Let me have one of my hands drive you home with the cream. It is too heavy to carry 5 miles in this heat." Rebecca wanted to refuse, but practicality won out. The crock was indeed heavy, and she was already tired from the walk over. "Thank you," she said. "I accept." Andrew called for one of his ranch hands, a young man named Billy who brought around a wagon. The ride back to Rebecca's cabin took less than 30 minutes, and Billy helped her carry the crock inside before tipping his hat and heading back to the ranch. Alone in her cabin, Rebecca stood in the quiet and tried to process what had just happened. She had gone seeking cream and found employment that could save her claim and give her a real future. She had met a man who seemed decent and kind, who treated her with respect and offered help without demands. It felt like a miracle, and Rebecca had learned to be suspicious of miracles. But as she poured cream into her churn and began the rhythmic work of making butter, she allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in months: hope. The butter came together beautifully, rich and golden, and Rebecca worked it clean before pressing it into molds. She would deliver it to Mrs. Henderson tomorrow along with the eggs and cheese, fulfilling her obligation. And on Monday, she would begin a new chapter, one that might finally offer some stability. Saturday passed in a blur of work. Rebecca delivered her goods to Mrs. Henderson, who paid her and immediately ordered more for the following week. She spent the afternoon cleaning her cabin from top to bottom and mending her other dress, so she would have 2 suitable for work. Sunday she allowed herself a day of rest, reading from Thomas's Bible and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her stomach about starting her new position. Monday morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching day. Rebecca dressed in her blue calico, braided her hair neatly, and set out at dawn for the long walk to the O'Connor ranch. Her feet were already sore from all the walking she had done the previous week, but she ignored the discomfort. This was important, and she would not falter. She arrived at the ranch just as the sun was fully up, and found Andrew already awake and working in the barn. He looked surprised to see her on foot, but said nothing, simply gesturing for her to follow him to the house. The cook, a stout woman in her 60s named Margaret, greeted Rebecca with frank assessment. "So you are the new girl," she said. "Mr. O'Connor says you know your way around a dairy and a kitchen." "I do, madam," Rebecca replied respectfully. "Good. I have no patience for teaching someone from nothing. Come on, then. The men expect breakfast at 6, and it is already past 5:30. The next few hours were intense. Margaret ran her kitchen with military precision, and she expected Rebecca to keep up. There were biscuits to make, bacon to fry, eggs to scramble, coffee to brew, and all of it had to be hot and ready when the men came in from their morning chores. Rebecca worked quickly, grateful for her experience managing her own household and the extra cooking she had done when helping Thomas's mother during a brief period when the older woman had been ill. The ranch hands filed in at 6 exactly, 6 men of varying ages, all dusty and hungry. They were polite enough, nodding to Rebecca and thanking her for the food, but their real attention was on eating. Andrew came in last, and Rebecca noticed he sat at the end of the table rather than at the head, eating alongside his men rather than apart from them. It spoke to a certain kind of leadership, one based on respect rather than distance. After breakfast came the washing up, and then Margaret led Rebecca to the dairy. The O'Connor operation was far more extensive than Rebecca's had been. There were 4 milk cows, all healthy and producing well, plus chickens, ducks, and a large garden that needed constant attention in the summer heat. The men need a hot lunch at noon and dinner at 6, Margaret explained. Breakfast at 6 in the morning. Between meals you manage the dairy, gather eggs, work the garden, and keep the house clean. Sundays you have off, but you need to leave meals prepared that the men can heat themselves. I understand, Rebecca said, looking at the sheer volume of work and wondering if she could truly manage it all. Margaret must have seen something in her expression because her stern face softened slightly. It is a lot, she admitted, but Mr. O'Connor is a fair man and the hands are good workers who do not make extra trouble. You will find your rhythm. The first week was exhausting. Rebecca rose before dawn each day and made the long walk to the ranch, worked herself nearly to the bone for 12 hours, and then walked home in the evening to collapse into bed. Her feet blistered and her back ached, and more than once she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But she also saw the evidence of her work. The men ate well and seemed satisfied. The dairy produced quality goods that Andrew sold in town for good prices. The garden flourished under her attention, and the house stayed clean and orderly. She was managing, barely, but managing nonetheless. On Friday, as she was preparing to make the long walk home, Andrew stopped her. "Mrs. Thornton, a word, please." Rebecca's heart sank. Had she failed somehow? Was he going to let her go after only a week? "You have done excellent work this week," Andrew said, and Rebecca felt her anxiety ease. "Margaret is very impressed, and the men have commented on how much they are enjoying the meals. I am satisfied that the arrangement is working well." "Thank you, Mr. O'Connor," Rebecca said. "I have been trying my best." "I can see that." He paused. "I would like to make good on my offer of a horse. The walk each day is clearly taking a toll, and I think you have more than proven yourself." Rebecca wanted to protest, to say she could manage the walk, but she was so tired that the words would not come. "That is very generous," she said instead. "Come with me." Andrew led her to the barn where a chestnut mare stood in one of the stalls. The horse was older, perhaps 15 or 16, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. "This is Rosie," Andrew said. "She was my first horse when I started working ranches as a boy. She is too old for hard work now, but she is gentle and reliable for riding. I would like you to have her." "Mr. O'Connor, I cannot simply take your horse," Rebecca protested. "She is clearly valuable to you." "She is valuable," Andrew agreed. "Which is why I want her with someone who will treat her well. Consider it part of your wages if you prefer. A tool to make your work easier, like providing a cook with a good stove." Rebecca reached out and stroked Rosie's soft nose. The mare whickered gently, and Rebecca felt something in her heart ease. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I will take excellent care of her. I know you will." Andrew showed her the saddle and tack that went with Rosie, explaining the mare's quirks and preferences. Then he helped Rebecca mount, adjusting the stirrups to fit her shorter legs. Riding home was a revelation. What had taken 2 hours on foot took barely 30 minutes on horseback, and Rebecca arrived at her cabin with energy to spare. She got Rosie settled in the small barn that had housed Bess, giving her water and some of the hay she had left over. That night, for the first time in a week, Rebecca had time to think about something other than simple survival. She sat on her porch in the cooling evening air and realized that her circumstances had changed dramatically in just 7 days. She had steady work, reliable income, and now transportation that would make her life significantly easier. More than that, she had found herself thinking about Andrew O'Connor at odd moments throughout the week, the way he treated his workers with respect, the quiet competence with which he managed his ranch, the kindness in his eyes when he had given her Rosie. He was a good man, she thought, and good men were rare commodities on the frontier. Rebecca pushed those thoughts aside. She was an employee, nothing more, and it would be foolish to read anything else into his kindness. She had enough to manage without complicating matters with inappropriate feelings. The second week was markedly easier with Rosie to carry her to and from the ranch. Rebecca found her rhythm in the work, learning the peculiarities of the kitchen and the preferences of the ranch hands. Margaret was preparing to leave, and she spent time showing Rebecca her recipes and techniques, passing on years of accumulated wisdom. On Wednesday of that week, Rebecca was in the garden harvesting vegetables when Andrew approached. She had seen him in passing throughout her days, but they had not spoken privately since the day he had given her Rosie. "Mrs. Thornton, do you have a moment?" he asked. Rebecca stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "Of course, Mr. O'Connor." "I wanted to discuss the sleeping arrangements," he said. "Margaret leaves at the end of next week, and I have been thinking about the practicality of you riding back and forth each day as the weather changes. Winter can be brutal out here, and there will be days when the ride is dangerous or impossible." Rebecca had been trying not to think about winter. "I have managed winters before, Mr. O'Connor. I am sure you have. But I would feel better knowing you had a safe place here when the weather is poor. There is a room off the kitchen that Margaret has been using. It has its own entrance and a good lock. I would like you to consider it your room, to use as needed." "People will talk," Rebecca said again, the same concern from their first conversation. "Let them talk," Andrew said with a shrug. "Anyone who has seen how hard you work knows there is nothing improper happening. And my foreman's wife, Clara, has already mentioned she would be happy to serve as a chaperone if you need one." Rebecca considered. The room would be convenient, and he was right about the winter weather. "Could I see the room?" she asked. Andrew led her inside and showed her a small but comfortable space off the kitchen. It held a narrow bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a window that looked out over the garden. The door had a sturdy lock on the inside, and there was a separate entrance that led directly outside. "It is meant to be a housekeeper's room," Andrew explained. "Margaret preferred to have her own space rather than being up in the main house. I thought you might appreciate the same." The room was actually nicer than her cabin, with a real floor and walls that did not let in the wind. Rebecca felt a complicated mix of emotions. Accepting this felt like giving up some independence, but it also felt practical and safe. "I would like to continue staying at my own cabin most nights," she said slowly. "But I would be grateful to have this room available when the weather is poor or when work keeps me late." "That seems reasonable," Andrew agreed. "The room is yours whenever you need it." As August progressed, Rebecca found herself spending more time at the ranch. It was simply more practical to stay when she was preparing food for the next day or when evening chores ran late. She kept her cabin maintained, riding back on Sundays and sometimes on evenings when she had extra energy. But the little room off the kitchen became increasingly familiar. Margaret left on a warm Saturday morning, hugging Rebecca goodbye and telling her to take care of the men. "Mr. O'Connor is a good employer," she said. "You have landed in a fortunate situation, my dear. Do not waste it." Rebecca promised she would not, and then she was alone as the sole woman managing the household. It was daunting but also empowering. This was her domain now, and she ran it with quiet competence. The men appreciated her work. She learned their individual preferences and made sure there was always hot coffee, hearty food, and clean clothes when they needed them. In return, they were unfailingly polite, helping with heavy lifting and treating her with respect. Andrew was different, though. Rebecca found herself aware of him in a way she was not with the other men. She noticed when he came in from working cattle, dusty and tired but still taking time to thank her for the meal. She noticed how he spoke gently to the horses and how he listened when his men brought him problems. She noticed the rare smile that transformed his serious face into something almost handsome. She told herself it was simple appreciation for a good employer. But late at night, alone in her room, she admitted it was more than that. September brought cooler temperatures and the beginning of fall work on the ranch. The cattle needed to be gathered from the summer ranges and preparations made for winter. It was a busy time, and Andrew was often gone from dawn until well after dark. One evening he came in long after the other men had eaten, looking exhausted. Rebecca had kept a plate warm for him, and she served it without comment. "Thank you, Mrs. Thornton," he said, sinking into a chair. "I am sorry to keep you waiting." "It is not a problem," Rebecca replied. "This is what you pay me for." Andrew ate in silence for a few moments, then looked up at her. "May I ask you something personal?" Rebecca felt her heart skip but nodded. "Of course. You ever resent being here, working for someone else rather than building your own place?" The question surprised her. "No," she said honestly. "I am grateful for the work and the security it provides." "Why do you ask?" Andrew set down his fork. "I have been thinking about your situation. You have your own land, your own claim. Working here must feel like putting your dreams on hold." Rebecca sat down across from him, something she normally would not do, but the late hour and the unusual conversation made it feel appropriate. "My dream was to build a life with Thomas," she said quietly. "When he died, that dream died with him. This is not putting anything on hold, Mr. O'Connor. This is building something new, and I am grateful for the opportunity." "You could remarry," Andrew said, then looked immediately uncomfortable, as if he had not meant to say it aloud. "That is, I am sure there are men who would be interested." "You could rebuild your original plan." "I have no interest in remarrying simply for convenience," Rebecca said firmly. "If I ever marry again, it will be because I love someone and they love me. Until then, I am content to build a life on my own terms." Andrew nodded slowly. "That is admirable," he said. "Not everyone has that kind of strength." "I think you do," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the personal observation. "You could have married by now, I imagine, a successful rancher in need of a wife to manage his household. But you chose to hire an employee instead." "I will not marry for convenience either," Andrew said, meeting her eyes. The moment stretched between them, charged with something unspoken. Then Andrew looked away, breaking the spell. "Thank you for keeping the food warm, Mrs. Thornton. You should get some rest." Rebecca stood, suddenly flustered. "Good night, Mr. O'Connor." She retreated to her room, heart pounding. That had been more than an employer speaking to his employee. That had been something else, something she did not dare name. October brought the first real cold snap, and Rebecca was grateful for the warm room off the kitchen. She still rode back to her cabin on Sundays, but she spent most nights at the ranch now, rising in the dark to start breakfast and falling into bed exhausted after cleaning up from dinner. She and Andrew had settled into a comfortable pattern of interaction. They spoke about ranch business and household needs, keeping things professional. But there were moments, small ones, when their eyes would meet across the table or when their hands would brush reaching for the same dish, and Rebecca would feel that spark of awareness. She tried to ignore it. Andrew was her employer, and she was his employee. There was no room for anything else in that equation, no matter how kind he was or how her heart sped up when he smiled at her. But ignoring something did not make it go away. The change came on a cold night in late October. A storm had rolled in unexpectedly, bringing wind and sleet that rattled the windows. The men had all taken shelter in the bunkhouse, and Rebecca had secured the animals before retreating to the kitchen to prepare the next day's bread. She was kneading dough when Andrew came in from checking the barn one final time. He was soaked through, his coat dripping and his hair plastered to his head. "Good Lord, Mr. O'Connor," Rebecca exclaimed, setting aside the dough. "You are freezing. Sit by the stove and get out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia." Andrew obeyed without argument, too cold to protest. Rebecca grabbed towels and helped him out of the sodden coat, then retreated to give him privacy while he changed into dry clothes he kept in one of the back rooms. She made hot coffee and brought it to him once he was settled by the stove, wrapped in a blanket and shivering. "Drink this," she ordered, "and stay by the heat until you are properly warm." "Yes, madam," Andrew said, a hint of amusement in his voice despite his discomfort. Rebecca returned to her bread, but she kept an eye on him, worried. She had seen Thomas sicken and die, and she would not watch another person suffer from exposure if she could prevent it. Gradually, Andrew's shivering subsided, and color returned to his face. "Thank you," he said finally. "I was more chilled than I realized." "You should have come in sooner," Rebecca scolded gently. "The animals would have survived an extra 5 minutes of discomfort." "Probably," Andrew agreed, "but I needed to make sure everything was secured. This storm could last through tomorrow." Rebecca glanced at the window where sleet continued to pelt against the glass. "Will the men be all right in the bunkhouse? They have a good stove and plenty of wood. They will be fine." Andrew sipped his coffee. "You should get some rest, Mrs. Thornton. Tomorrow will be a long day if we are all stuck inside." "I will, once I finish the bread." Rebecca shaped the loaves and set them to rise, then began cleaning up her work area. She was aware of Andrew watching her, and the kitchen felt suddenly smaller, more intimate in the lamplight. "Rebecca," Andrew said, using her first name for the first time. She turned, startled. "I owe you an apology," he continued. "I have been thinking about what you said last month about building a life on your own terms. I admire that more than I can say. But I have not been entirely honest with you or with myself about why I offered you this position." Rebecca's heart began to pound. "What do you mean?" Andrew set down his coffee cup and stood, keeping the blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "I told you about my mother, and that was true. But it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I had noticed you before your husband died, in town when you came to sell your goods. I thought you were beautiful and kind, and I was sorry to learn you were married because it meant I had no chance to know you better." Rebecca could barely breathe. "Mr. O'Connor, when I heard that Thomas had died, my first thought was sympathy for your loss. My second thought, and I am not proud of this, was that perhaps now I might have an opportunity to know you. When you came here seeking cream, it felt like providence. I offered you employment because you genuinely needed it and because I wanted to help. But I also did it because I wanted you near, wanted the chance to see if what I felt was real or simply a passing attraction. He took a step closer, his gray eyes intense in the lamplight. I have my answer now, Rebecca. It is real. What I feel for you is real, and it grows stronger every day I spend in your presence. I know I am your employer and that this puts you in an awkward position. I will understand if you wish to leave, to find other work or return to managing your own claim. But I had to tell you the truth because I cannot keep pretending I see you only as an employee when you have become so much more. Rebecca stood frozen, the confession washing over her. Part of her wanted to protest, to insist that this was improper and complicated and impossible. But a larger part, the part that had been noticing Andrew for months now, felt a surge of joy so intense it was almost painful. I do not wish to leave, she said quietly, and I do not see you only as an employer. Andrew closed the remaining distance between them, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. What do you see? He asked softly. I see a good man, Rebecca said. A kind man who has given me safety and opportunity when I had neither. I see someone who works alongside his men rather than above them, who treats everyone with respect. I see someone I have come to care for more than I should, more than is probably wise. Rebecca. Her name was a prayer on his lips. May I court you properly? May I take you to town on Sundays and introduce you as someone I am hoping to win, not as my employee? People will talk, Rebecca said, but she was smiling. Let them talk, Andrew replied, echoing his earlier words. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his hand. You are worth any amount of gossip. Rebecca leaned into his touch, feeling tears prick her eyes. She had not expected to feel this way again, had not believed she could love someone after losing Thomas. But this was different. Thomas had been a boy she grew up with, someone familiar and safe. Andrew was a man who challenged her and respected her, who saw her strength and admired it rather than feeling threatened. Yes, she whispered. You may court me. Andrew smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that transformed his face, and bent slowly to kiss her. Rebecca met him halfway, and when their lips touched, she felt something ignite in her chest, a warmth that spread through her entire body. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and restrained passion. When they finally pulled apart, Andrew rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for months, he admitted. I know, Rebecca said. I wanted it too. They stood together by the stove, the storm raging outside, and Rebecca felt something settle in her soul. This was right. This was real. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The courtship that followed was both proper and passionate. Andrew was meticulous about treating Rebecca with respect, making sure she had time away from work to spend with him as a suitor rather than an employer. He took her to church on Sundays, sitting beside her in the pew, and introducing her to the community as the woman he was courting. There was gossip, as they had both expected, but it was not malicious. Most people seemed pleased that two hard-working young people had found each other. Mrs. Henderson made a point of telling Rebecca she thought they made a fine couple, and several other women in town offered their congratulations. Rebecca divided her time between the ranch and her own cabin, determined to maintain her independence even as the courtship deepened. Andrew respected this, helping her make improvements to her property on Sundays after church. They repaired fences, rebuilt the chicken coop, and made plans for what livestock she might acquire in the spring. But they also spent long evenings talking on the porch of the ranch house, wrapped in blankets against the growing cold, learning everything about each other. Andrew told her about growing up in Colorado, about the years of hard work that had built his ranch. Rebecca told him about her childhood in Ohio, about coming west with Thomas, and the dreams they had shared. "You still love him?" Andrew asked one night, his voice carefully neutral. "I will always love him," Rebecca said honestly. "He was my first love and he was a good man, but he is gone and I am still here. What I feel for you is not less because I once loved Thomas. It is simply different. Deeper maybe because we are older and have both known loss." Andrew pulled her closer. "I can live with that," he said. "I do not need to be your first love, Rebecca. I just need to be your last." In November, Andrew officially proposed. He did it at her cabin, on the land that she still owned, going down on one knee in the small parlor where she and Thomas had once planned their future. "Rebecca Thornton, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and my partner, building a life together that honors both of our dreams?" "Yes," Rebecca said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, absolutely yes." The ring was simple gold, sized to fit her finger perfectly. Andrew slipped it on and then stood, pulling her into a kiss that left them both breathless. They set the wedding for December, giving them time to make arrangements but not so long that they had to wait through the whole winter. Rebecca worked with Clara, the foreman's wife, to make a dress from cream-colored fabric Andrew bought in town. It was not a traditional white wedding gown, but it was beautiful and suited her perfectly. Andrew spruced up the ranch house, adding finishing touches to the bedroom they would share and making sure everything was perfect for bringing home his bride. The men teased him good-naturedly about his nervousness, but they also worked hard to help prepare for the celebration. The wedding took place on a cold but clear December morning in the small church in Belmont. The entire community seemed to turn out, filling the pews and spilling into the yard outside. Rebecca wore her cream dress with a simple veil, and Andrew wore his best suit, his dark hair neatly combed and his eyes full of love as he watched her walk down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but moving. They exchanged vows promising to love and honor each other, to work together to build a life on the Nebraska plains. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Andrew kissed Rebecca with a tenderness that made several women in the audience cry. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn and food provided by the grateful community. Rebecca's butter and cheese featured prominently, and someone had even made a cake decorated with cream frosting. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Andrew and Rebecca finally found themselves alone in their bedroom. The nervousness Rebecca had felt earlier melted away as Andrew pulled her close. "Hello, wife," he murmured against her hair. "Hello, husband," Rebecca replied, smiling. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a joining of two people who had found each other against the odds. Afterwards, lying in Andrew's arms, Rebecca felt a contentment she had never expected to experience again. "Are you happy?" Andrew asked softly. "More than I can say," Rebecca replied. "More than I ever dreamed possible." The winter that followed was harsh, but they weathered it together. Rebecca managed the household while Andrew and his men tended the cattle and kept the ranch running. In the evenings they sat by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's presence. Rebecca still made butter, more than ever now with the expanded dairy. The cream was rich, and the results were excellent, and she thought sometimes about how she had come to Andrew seeking cream and found something so much more valuable. In the spring, Andrew helped Rebecca hire a young couple to manage her original claim. They would work the land and give her a share of the proceeds, keeping her ownership intact while allowing her to focus on the ranch. It was a practical solution that satisfied her need for independence while acknowledging the reality of their shared life. By summer, Rebecca realized she was pregnant. She told Andrew one evening after the men had finished dinner and retreated to the bunkhouse. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy and wonder, and a tenderness that made her cry happy tears. "We are going to have a child," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "Our child." Their son was born in February of 1878, during a blizzard that kept them all confined to the ranch for 3 days. Clara served as midwife, and Andrew paced anxiously in the main room until he heard the baby's first cry. They named him Thomas Andrew O'Connor, honoring both the past and the future. He was a healthy baby with dark hair like his father and gray eyes that seemed to take in everything. Motherhood transformed Rebecca in ways she had not anticipated. She had less time for the heavy household work, but Andrew hired a young woman from town to help with the cooking and cleaning. Rebecca focused on the baby and on managing the dairy, which had become even more profitable. Andrew was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. Rebecca would often find them together in the barn, Andrew talking to the baby as he worked, Thomas gurgling contentedly from his basket. The ranch continued to prosper. Andrew's hard work and smart management paid off, and within a few years, they had one of the most successful operations in the territory. But success did not change them. They remained the hardworking, devoted couple who had found each other through cream and providence. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler and then an energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals. When he was 3, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, and 2 years after that came another son, James. The ranch house rang with the sound of children's laughter, and Rebecca marveled at how full her life had become. She still made butter, teaching Sarah the old techniques as the girl grew old enough to help. The rhythmic motion of churning cream reminded her of that desperate day when she had walked to the O'Connor ranch seeking help, not knowing she would find everything she needed. One evening, when Thomas was 10, and Sarah was 7 and James was 5, the family sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the Nebraska sky in shades of gold and purple. Andrew had his arm around Rebecca, and the children were arguing amiably about whose turn it was to gather eggs in the morning. "Do you remember when I came here asking for cream?" Rebecca asked Andrew quietly. "Of course," Andrew replied. "Best day of my life, even though I did not know it at the time." "I was so scared," Rebecca admitted. "I thought I was going to lose everything." "Instead, you gained everything," Andrew said, gesturing to the children, the ranch, the life they had built together. "We gained everything," Rebecca corrected. "This is not just my happy ending, Andrew. It is ours." He kissed her temple gently. "You are right, as always." Sarah called for their attention, pointing at a hawk circling overhead, and the moment of quiet reflection passed. But Rebecca held it in her heart, that gratitude for the cream that had brought her to Andrew and the love that had transformed both their lives. The years continued to pass in the rhythm of ranch life. Seasons turned, children grew, and the land they worked together flourished. Thomas eventually took over much of the day-to-day ranch management, showing his father's skill with cattle and his mother's head for business. Sarah married a young lawyer in Belmont and gave Rebecca and Andrew their first grandchildren. James went east to study agriculture and came back with new techniques that made the ranch even more profitable. Through it all, Andrew and Rebecca remained devoted to each other, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They had both known loss and loneliness, and because of that, they never took each other for granted. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Andrew surprised Rebecca with a gift. It was a butter churn, beautifully crafted from oak and decorated with intricate carvings. "What is this for?" Rebecca asked, laughing. We have 3 perfectly good churns already. This one is special, Andrew said. Look at the carving. Rebecca examined the churn more closely and saw that the carvings told a story. A woman walking across plains toward a ranch, a man offering a crock of cream. 2 people standing together, their hands joined, children playing around them, a life built together. Andrew, she breathed, tears filling her eyes. It is beautiful. It is our story, Andrew said. The story of how you came to me needing cream, and I gave you cream and everything else I had to give. My devotion, my heart, my life. The best trade I ever made. Rebecca set down the churn and wrapped her arms around her husband, holding him tight. The best trade we both made, she said. They held each other as the sun set over the Nebraska plains. 2 people who had found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built something lasting. The butter churn sat between them, a symbol of how something as simple as cream could change everything, could bring 2 lonely people together and create a love that would last a lifetime. That night, lying in bed with Andrew's arms around her, Rebecca thought about the desperate young widow who had walked to a stranger's ranch seeking help. That woman had been so scared, so certain she was facing ruin. She had thought she was asking for cream to save her business, her land, her future. She had gotten all of that and more. She had gotten partnership and passion, family and fulfillment, and a love that had sustained her through 25 years and would sustain her for however many years remained. The cream had been the beginning, but devotion had been the answer. Andrew's creamy devotion to her and hers to him had built this life they shared. It had weathered storms and droughts, loss and hardship, and emerged stronger every time. I love you, she whispered into the darkness. I love you too, Andrew replied, his voice warm and certain. Always have, always will. Rebecca closed her eyes and let sleep take her, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, held in the arms of the man who had given her everything when she had needed it most. The man who had looked at a desperate widow asking for cream and seen a partner, a love, a future. The man who had given her not just cream for her churning, but creamy devotion that would last forever. Morning came as it always did on the ranch, with roosters crowing and the first light of dawn breaking across the plains. Rebecca and Andrew rose together, as they had for 25 years, ready to face another day of work and life and love. The butter churn Andrew had given her sat in the kitchen, catching the morning light. Rebecca ran her hand over the carved scenes, tracing the story of their life together. Later, she thought, she would use it to make butter, continuing the work that had brought them together. But for now, she simply appreciated it as a symbol of everything they had built. Andrew came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how lucky we are," Rebecca said. "About how a simple need for cream led to all of this." "Not luck," Andrew said. "Providence, fate, whatever you want to call it, we were meant to find each other, Rebecca. The cream was just an excuse." Rebecca turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring 25 years of love into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, she smiled. "Maybe you are right," she said. "Maybe I was always meant to walk to your ranch that day. Maybe you were always meant to give me more than I asked for." "Definitely," Andrew agreed. "Now come on, we have a ranch to run and a family to feed." The devotion continues, but so does the work. They walked out together into the new day, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came. Behind them, the butter churn sat in the kitchen, waiting to be used, a reminder of beginnings and of the enduring power of love. The children arrived for breakfast, followed by the ranch hands who still depended on Rebecca's cooking despite her children being grown. The table was full and loud, filled with conversation and laughter, and the comfortable chaos of family. Rebecca looked around at the faces gathered in her kitchen and felt her heart swell with gratitude. This was what she had gained from asking for cream. Not just Andrew, though he was the center of it all, but this entire life, this family, this community. She caught Andrew's eye across the table, and he smiled at her, that special smile reserved only for her. In that smile she saw everything, their past, their present, their future. She saw the young rancher who had offered help to a desperate widow. She saw the husband who had stood beside her through joy and sorrow. She saw the father who had raised their children with patience and love. She saw her partner, her best friend, her great love. And in that moment, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that every step of her journey had been worth it. The loss and the struggle, the fear and the uncertainty, all of it had led her here, to this kitchen full of love and life. The cream had been necessary for her churning, yes. But Andrew's creamy devotion, his unwavering love and support, had been necessary for her soul. Together they had churned their individual lives into something rich and wonderful, a marriage and a family that would endure long after they were gone. "More coffee, Mama?" Sarah asked, breaking into her reverie. "Yes, please," Rebecca said, holding out her cup. Life went on as it always did, in moments both ordinary and profound. And as the sun rose higher over the Nebraska plains, as the family finished breakfast and dispersed to their various tasks, as Andrew kissed Rebecca goodbye before heading out to check the cattle, the butter churn sat in the kitchen, holding the story of a love that had begun with a simple request and blossomed into something extraordinary. She had needed cream for her churning. The rancher had given cream and creamy devotion. And in the giving and receiving, two lives had become one, creating a legacy of love that would span generations. That was the true story, Rebecca thought as she began her day's work. Not just a tale of survival on the frontier, but a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of taking chances, and the miraculous ways that love could transform everything. The butter she would make today would be rich and golden, perfect for selling in town or serving to her family. But it would also be a symbol, a reminder that from simple ingredients, properly tended and worked with devotion, something wonderful could be created, just like their marriage, just like their life together. Rebecca smiled to herself and got to work, content in the knowledge that she was living a story worth telling, a love worth celebrating, and a life worth cherishing every single day.